Sherrett Robinson, a Canadian woman wrongfully convicted for the death of her infant son Joshua in 1996, has finally been cleared of all charges as of 2012. With special thanks to dedicated members of the Innocence Project in Canada, after 13 years of fighting, this single mother has since been exonerated for the false claims imposed that she had purposefully caused the death of her baby son Joshua to occur. Nevertheless, currently at 45 years old, Sherry continues to live with the detrimental effects resulting both from the loss of her child and the overall miscarriage of justice experienced. In the following video project, the case of Sherrett Robinson will be thoroughly discussed. On January 22, 1996, Sherrett Robinson, only 20 years old at the time, awoke in her home within Belleville, Ontario, to the horrifying discovery that her 4-month-old son Joshua was lying face down in his playpen, seemingly unconscious. A sobbing Sherry immediately contacted 911. Although Joshua was rushed to the emergency room, he was unfortunately declared deceased by medical practitioners later. A statement written by Sherry comprehensively highlights how she felt within her son's final moments. She states, "I will never forget the terror I felt when I reached down to pick him up and discovered that he was blue and his little body was completely stiff." After the death of her son, she further wrote, "Eventually, the doctors came and told me he had died and let me hold him to say goodbye." Additionally, it is observed by surrounding witnesses that there, in the emergency room of a Belleville hospital, she sang him a lullaby, refusing to let go. Unfortunately for Sherry, this was just the beginning of a subsequent series of devastating events to occur. In the following months, this grieving mother would additionally be subjected to a substantial amount of emotional mental distress. On March 7, 1996, she would initially be forced to put her other 18-month-old son Austin up for adoption, and eventually, as of March 27, 1996, Sherry was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Based on the mentioned information, how then does a seemingly devoted and loving mother mourning for the death of her one son end up also losing her other son as she becomes wrongfully convicted for the crime of infanticide? When an individual is criminally convicted based on a charge of infanticide, it generally indicates that the individual is being held accountable for the act of deliberately causing the death of a very young child, specifically a child under a year of age. Although it is now universally illegal, this practice was once employed primarily to dispose of unwanted children. This was supposed to effectively control the poor standards of living that were overall associated with the issue of human overpopulation within certain societies. Basically, Sherry was ultimately accused of intentionally smothering Joshua, when in reality this tragic event was simply an accident that sadly commonly occurs to infants. A panel of pathology experts later testified during Sherry's acquittal that the events which transpired likely involved the fact that Joshua was accidentally left in his crib with too many heavy blankets overnight, fatally resulting in suffocation from being placed in an unsafe environment. Sherry knew she was innocent and continuously maintained this notion, but due to the dubious allegations made based on the medical opinion of formerly acclaimed forensic pathologist Dr. Charles Smith, it is falsely presumed that foul play was involved. Ultimately, an innocent Sherry was wrongfully prosecuted and convicted for the accidental death of her youngest son.
Dr. Charles Smith has been in many courtrooms over the years, but he's yet to testify at the inquiry into his own work. He already has made some of his thoughts known. An apology read by his lawyer came last November at the start of testimony.
He made a number of mistakes for which he is truly sorry. Dr. Smith sincerely regrets these mistakes and apologizes to all who may have been affected by his errors.
At the time of Sherry's conviction, Dr. Charles Smith was recognized as a renowned pediatric forensic pathologist. Therefore, his claims that Joshua had been deliberately smothered were likely immediately substantiated by the criminal justice system. due to his esteemed social position within the community. In 1999, a Fifth Estate documentary that was premiering on CBC television officially singled him out as one of 4 Canadians with this rare expertise. In April 2007, Dr. Smith's astonishing reputation plummeted. This was emanated based on a review of an Ontario coroner's inquiry, in which numerous questionable conclusions regarding foul play within the autopsy cases conducted by Dr. Smith were identified. After these discoveries were made, a public inquiry concerning the doctor's practice was initiated. According to the Gouge Inquiry Report, led by Justice Stephen Gouge, it is asserted that Smith lacked basic knowledge about forensic pathology. As of October 2008, it is officially concluded that Smith actively misled his superiors, made false and misleading statements in court, and exaggerated his expertise in trials.
People will know that if they injure a child needlessly, they're going to be confronted by it and confronted in the courts of this province.
Since Sherry's trial was primarily based on the expert testimony of Dr. Smith, who was established as the Crown's star witness, his erroneous findings were likely immediately validated by the criminal justice system due to his notorious reputation within the field of criminology at the time. The injuries reported on Joshua's body, based on Dr. Smith's autopsy, revealed a skull fracture which led to swelling in Joshua's brain and additionally bleeding in his neck tissues. These falsified discoveries that Dr. Smith was previously accredited with would be utilized within his testimony in order to effectively corroborate the flawed conclusion he makes by stating that Sherry was ultimately guilty of murdering her youngest son as she suffocated him on purpose. Although the initial charge imposed upon Sherry involved murder, the Crown prosecutor offered to retract the original indictment and instead reinstated one of infanticide. This would result in a significantly reduced prison sentence for Sherry, as it was doubtful Sherry could successfully win over the court based on the previously relied upon evidence presented by Dr. Smith. Therefore, even though Sherry would technically be pleading not guilty to the new charge of infanticide, she is basically still forced to agree with the allegations of the justice system, which ultimately holds her responsible for personally harming baby Joshua. As of June 2nd, 1999, Sherry was officially found guilty and sentenced to a year in prison, consequently earning her the stigmatized label of being a baby killer within society, which remained even after she had been officially exonerated. There are numerous factors that have the ability to potentially elicit a wrongful conviction. In regard to Sherry's case, it is exhibited that this grieving mother of 2 was wrongfully convicted for the death of baby Joshua due to a combination of individualistic and systemic factors. In this situation, the individual factors acknowledged are primarily attributed to the moral wrongdoings of Dr. Smith. Meanwhile, systemically, these factors are associated with the social issue of inequality, which continues to prevail as these values are institutionalized within the social structure of Western societies. Based on this observation, the conditions that ultimately prompt a wrongful conviction to occur are significantly multi-causal. Through Eric Coleman's critique of theories associated with wrongful convictions, it is stated that various causal factors have generally been presented in single, undifferentiated lists, without acknowledgement that factors of different kinds are present. As it is signified that numerous factors collaboratively contribute to the wrongful conviction of an innocent individual, the 2 main components entailed must be first independently addressed in order to successfully identify the specific factors responsible within each case of wrongful conviction. Mainly, the individualistic conditions applied in the scenario can be acknowledged throughout the process of the trial, as individual factors of wrongful convictions are associated to the personal wrongdoings of workers within the criminal justice system. As observed, a false conviction occurred for Sherry predominantly because falsified forensic evidence and fraudulent testimonies from an unreliable expert witness were doubtlessly accepted as a fact. As it is likely questioned why the disgraced Dr. Smith frequently proposed these erroneous proposals, the reasons for his actions are plausibly due to the personal biases he implicitly encompasses, since it almost seems as if he simply wants to play God by regularly attempting to convict and imprison innocent individuals for crimes they have not committed. Based on this, It is subsequently imperative to involve systemic factors when attempting to identify the causes of wrongful convictions, as individualized biases are ultimately based on socially constructed ideologies. What are the biases that Dr. Smith personally encompasses? The main bias that Dr. Smith was preconceived to possess directly refers to the thinking dirty approach. According to Gouge, this mindset basically immediately speculates that guilt is present as cases of these crime are ideologically maintained and reflected through a bias-based and narrow-minded approach. Basically, the thinking dirty approach claims that injuries observed were deliberately inflicted. That's the presumption to be disproved. Further, Gouge states that think dirty reflects a cast of mind that was prevalent often within the childcare community in the 1990s. As numerous accounts of wrongful convictions are subsequently precipitated on the basis of personal ideological biases, the systemic factors centrally involved are primarily evoked on the basis of socially constructed issues of inequality. All members of society are nurtured to believe that these stereotypical beliefs and values are natural, when in reality they are continuously learned and maintained by social institutions throughout an individual's life. Therefore, in regard to the wrongful conviction endured by Sherry, she was likely vulnerable to being falsely accused and eventually convicted due to the standardized norms within society. With respect to inequality endured by marginalized individuals, the factors involved within acts of systemic discrimination centrally include biases associated to gendered and racialized differences, and additionally the social status of an individual within a specific society. As stated by Emma Cunliffe, in addition to the great number of women among Smith's victims, those who were wrongly accused were disproportionately likely to be Aboriginal or people of color, poor and otherwise marginalized. Even before they suffered the inconceivable horror of losing children and then facing wrongful accusations, many of these families were struggling to get by. Due to the culturally standardized social construction of inequality, even when individuals are released from prison and exonerated, the biases surrounding the crime they were previously accused of are socially stigmatized and prevalently remain as a label. This is imperative to include when analyzing the factors that ultimately lead to a false conviction, as occupying a macroscopic approach to this problem will effectively reveal that external or environmental conditions are prevalently responsible for systematically maintaining an unjust criminal justice system. Life after exoneration remains pessimistic for wrongfully convicted individuals, as they continue to struggle with issues of social inequality and are now additionally socially labeled as deviant. Although Dr. Smith was eventually publicly scrutinized for his immoral actions, the harm he had enacted to all the innocent individuals that he had wrongfully imprisoned was irreversible. Fortunately for Sherry, as of today, she has been able to diminish the label of baby killer that was previously assigned to her. Even as a result of this, it is reported by Innocence Canada that Sherry suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and ultimately has difficulty finding work after her conviction. Although Sherry, along with other victims negatively impacted by the miscarriage of justice, are to be compensated, these monetary values cannot compensate for the harm that has been permanently imposed to the victims of wrongful convictions and has further harmed their reputation and mental health, detrimentally influencing their overall satisfaction of life. What does this overall reveal about wrongful convictions? It is revealed based on the factors identified in the wrongful conviction of Sherrett Robinson that the systematic experiences associated with social inequality can ultimately be referred to as the wedge of injustice. The wedge of injustice can be utilized to predominantly explain how wrongful convictions continue to transpire as the criminal justice system continues to be incessantly impacted by the ideological biases of those that work there. Therefore, by understanding how marginalized individuals are systematically discriminated against, Members of society like Sherrett are exhibited to be increasingly vulnerable to the biases of powerful authoritative figures that socially pertain to a higher class, such as Dr. Smith. Overall, the miscarriage of justice that was imposed upon Sherrett by the current prejudicial state of the Canadian criminal justice system was likely due to the conditions that she is a woman, was of a young age at the time of her arrest and conviction, and further, a single mother within a society that prevalently values traits of masculinity.